Welcome to Assumptions, the podcast where two friends, one an atheist, that's me, Kyle, and one a Christian, that's Daniel, sit down and listen to each other's worldview. Today, while we are in the intermission in the middle of our second season, we have an interview planned. Daniel, who are we talking with today?
Kyle, on our last interview, just at the beginning, I mentioned that there was a friend of mine who had heard about this podcast and suggested that we have other voices.
Yeah.
And we're actually going to hear from that friend.
What?
What? Joy Beth Smith. I have been online friends with Joy Beth Smith for a couple of years, and so it's been actually quite exciting to talk in real life, as it were, or at least through Skype, for the first time. But she is someone who's written a lot on sexuality within the church. So Joy Beth Smith, she is the managing editor of Christianity Today. Christianity Today is it's one of the larger magazines for evangelicals. It takes a more, I think, slightly liberal but also conservative at the same time stance. They like to push buttons on certain issues. She has written a number of articles that have been published in places such as the Washington Post, New York Times. She's written an op-ed there. Christianity Today, obviously, she's written for them. And she's just publishing a book that's coming out this year, 2018, called Party of One: Truth, Longing, and the Subtle Art of Singleness. And yeah, this conversation was a lot of fun.
I had so much fun talking with Joy Beth. She was really enthusiastic. She really took the time to answer, I think, our questions eloquently and in depth for us as well. And had questions for us even to have that real feeling of a conversation.
Yeah, and she's been a supporter of the podcast for a while. I've chatted with her a lot about it, so it's been exciting to have her on the show. And I think I almost wish, this is one of those conversations that the longer it went, the more I wanted to talk to her. Especially there's some stuff that she brings out towards the end that I just think is fascinating, and I feel like we only tapped the surface of it. But I hope you enjoy this conversation. I hope you check out her book and her articles online. And so every time I have a studio day here, I'm just like, I'm going to go down to the studio and record some tracks. I've just got a very busy afternoon. Going to pop in the studio. I'm busy all day. I love it. It's the best. It's the best.
He is unbearable, is what he's trying to say.
That's precious.
Yeah. Hey, I want to dive right in because, oh my gosh, here we go. I just showed Kyle the purple...
The chart.
Yeah, the purple-red chart.
Yeah.
But Kyle...
It's the best thing.
Kyle was telling me about... What was the scale that you were talking about?
We're talking about the Kinsey scale.
Have you heard of that?
The Kinsey scale, which is less impressive, let's be honest.
It's not as fancy, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Kyle was telling me about that, and it made sense. But why are you so obsessed with this?
Well, I think that, this is the thing about the Kinsey scale, is that it's just really linear, right? It's like the scale of, what is it, 1 to 6?
Yeah.
Of heterosexual to homosexual, or 0 to 6, I guess.
Right.
And I think that I was doing a little research on it, and that was the way this originally came up is that I was in a group and some guy was posing an Ask Me Anything, and I was like, where do you land on the Kinsey scale? Because if you're going to pose and ask me anything, that's the kind of question I'm going to give you. And so then I started Googling, and it was really funny, the responses that people were giving to the Kinsey scale, because it was, it's a straight line, and they were like, I'm just kind of up and to the right. And I was like, well, that's kind of, I felt like I understood that response more than just a straight linear thing. And then someone actually posted this purple-red scale of attraction as a response to the Kinsey scale. And so that's how I kind of stumbled upon it. And I feel like what it does is that it expands a linear of where are you on the scale of gay to straight to something so much greater than that. And that it explains things and it allows for nuance in a discussion that hasn't actually been given nuance before. So everything from how serious your attraction is and what kind of attraction you have, all the way to what types of people what types of people you're attracted to. So I think that the gay straight discussion we've had for a while, but the veracity of your attraction is something that is kind of new. And especially in the church, I think that that's something that is definitely worth exploring more. So I saw this and I lost my mind, and I put it everywhere, and I want everyone to talk about it all the time. I want to laminate it and like bring it out to strangers and be like, what number and letter are you? It's like my new favorite thing.
I'm a hard F0.
Can you please have your publisher put that on the back of your business card for the book? You know, I'm sure you could pull that off, right?
That would be the best thing that could possibly happen to me.
I think for me, like, to speak of my own bias growing up, I remember when I was in university, and someone like came out to me being asexual. It's like, I'm not attracted to anyone. I'm like, what? Like, I didn't understand it. It didn't feel right or anything to me. But I think, this is getting more and more into the popular culture of like, there's not just sexualities, but there's attraction levels that go along with it, which is somewhat fascinating to me.
Yeah, and I think that, and I have a friend of mine who identifies as asexual, and we've actually had a lot of discussions about it, and it's actually something so much greater than just like a lack of attraction. It's actually like there's not only just like a lack of attraction, there are also like people who are only attracted like once they form like deep relational bonds. You know, it actually has nothing to do with the physical. You know, and so it's like,
I think is what they're called.
Right. And so like that kind of thing too, where you're like, it's actually like or you have like one person that like once you, I mean, really it's something along the lines of like the one, you know, where it's like, I have made a deep relation person, and I want to spend my life with that one person just as a person, you know, and like maybe we'll have sex, I guess. And for me, I'm like, this discussion, I feel like in the church, we really relegated it to like, men want to have lots of sex, and I guess women will like placate them, you know? And so it's something so much more complicated than that. And so you get into a marriage and you're like, the guy's going to want to rip my clothes off, and I guess I'll pretend to have a headache.
Yeah.
But this, like, having something like this as a tool for discussion it like really allows you to be like, oh, as a woman, I can be an F and not feel crazy. You know, I'm just like actually like hypersexual. Oh, okay.
Well,
I'm fine.
We just had Wesley, as you know, Skyping with us. No big deal. Yeah.
NPD.
That's right.
Way to just name
That's
drop.
right. Yeah. Just yeah. Just Wesley Hill and Joy Beth Smith. You know what? We can just go up from here. But we were just talking a little bit about how the romantic, he called it the cult of romantic love that our age is obsessed with. And it's interesting because I feel like this scale on the one hand kind of pushes back against that, saying that there are different levels of romantic attraction. But on the other hand, it still is hypersexualized. Like, we're still kind of obsessed over the sexuality aspect of it.
Yeah. And I think that I would love to talk to Wesley about this too. Maybe you can just like call him in right now.
Yeah, right.
Well, he just liked our tweet, so just as we were talking, so that's basically the same thing, you know.
Sure, it's fine. But I do think that I would really be interested in the idea of like what romance plays in this, because but the implication is that there are more people who are like, that there's a type of person who is like wooed by that, and then there are a type of people where it's like, that doesn't actually really matter to me. I'm much more like drawn by something else. So I would be really interested to know what he has to say about that. And for me, as a woman raised in a church that said like women are not, you know, like you are attracted to men and that's it. It was this chart was actually really freeing for me in a way, because I sort of felt like, you know how recently on the news when they've been predicting like hurricane paths, it just looks like spaghetti noodles, like kind of going everywhere. That's kind of the way I felt looking at this chart in a lot of ways, because I felt like I was just kind of doing some spaghetti noodles of like, I could be anywhere from an E3 all the way down to like a D2. But
you
it
just
was
sunk my battleship,
really...
by the way.
That's really funny. That would be such a fun dating game. Oh my gosh, how much fun on like date 5. Like,
right.
You have your card, I have mine, and we'll just try and guess, okay?
That's right.
But I think that what was really great about it for me was where I was like, you know what, like, I don't feel any pressure to identify as anything but heterosexual, because that's just what, like, I want to spend my life with a man, you know, so like, I'm going to be heterosexual, whatever. But like experiencing, you know, number 3 orientation, right. I guess, it was nice for me to see like that can exist, and I can still like, I'm, on a spectrum, I guess, but I don't feel any pressure to like change anything about myself. I just am like in this square on this thing, and that's great. Yeah. I don't know. I just felt a lot, as opposed to having to check a box, I was just like moving along the spectrum, and it was really nice to have, I don't know, company there.
Yeah. So moving away from like specifically sexuality and romantic attraction.
Do we have
to? And purple and red? I'm tired of it. Can we go to yellow now?
That's right. It's all wrapped up into the same thing, really. I'm just very curious. I mean, I have my own history. Daniel has his own history. What has the modern dating life been like for you?
Yeah, rough.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that originally I started off dating, coming out from super conservative Christianity. I started off dating with kind of like a sniper approach, where I had like this one guy in mind, like he was going to be the leader of the household, and I was going to like woo him with my like Christian femininity, and I was going to convince him that I could be meek and mild.
It's actually terrifying, like as a guy, to have it described that way. Get out of her sights.
Right.
Yeah. And I was not that good of an actress. So I dropped my approach and tried a shotgun approach, where it was just a numbers game. So like I just like threw out all of the guesses and like all the numbers, and I'm on all the sites. And like Henry Cloud gives it this, and like How to Get a Date Worth Keeping, which most Christian women who I know who are single swear by, but they're still single. So I don't know how much credence to give that advice, but it's that idea of like, the more you just put yourself out there, the higher odds you have of like actually like exposure, and whatever. So I did that for a while, of like, I'm just trying to like take all of the dates, and hopefully one of them will keep me. That hasn't worked so well. And so now I've reverted to like panhandling, and I feel like I'm just holding up a sign that says like, we'll cook and clean, no one has stopped by yet, but I'll let you know.
Right.
So that's kind of where we are.
I hear
fine.
I hear having animals helps with panhandling. Like if you have a dog and you're raising funds for a dog, it actually helps. So
okay,
just an idea.
So I'll get a puppy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or like a mangy dog, so they feel sorry for me. I feel like dating is just really frustrating and really hard and really sad. And I feel like, especially in the church, it's this really like impossible to navigate thing, because there are a lot of, like Daniel said, there are a lot of things where it's like men feel kind of, terrified by the situation and by women, and women feel like we're like, I am just doing the best I can and I have no idea. And I don't know.
Yeah, I think
we're like,
one of the things that makes it hard, I don't know, Kyle, if this is true for you. It might be, but as a Christian, because there's so many stakes on this relationship. It's not, I'm just going to date and hook up and have fun with it. It's more, I'm going to date so that I can marry. And I don't want to, there's the Velcro analogy. I don't want my Velcro to get unsticky, so this better work out well. And that just puts huge pressure to the point where if there's a cute girl in my church, like I don't want to talk to her, because it's just, the stakes are too high. I can't just get to know someone as a friend and then have things progress naturally.
Yeah. And it definitely feels like every conversation with a boy that's single is like an evaluation of some kind. And that just feels so unfair. Like it feels like if I stumble over my words, or if I have spinach in my teeth or something, that it's like points being docked from my like wife total. And that's awful, and you're like, I don't know how to get out of this. I don't know how to just be a person and you're a person and we're talking and we're just like kind of seeing if we hit it off, It's really hard, you guys.
Yeah, no, I know that. I mean, I guess what I'm even more curious about is this, and I forget where I read this now, but there's this perception of be single, be single, be single. And then there's somehow you get to an age and being like, why are you still single? Like there's you're damned if you do, damned if you don't type of thing. It's like, don't get into a relationship too quickly, but at the same time, if you're too old, then you should be in a relationship by now.
Yeah, and I think that in the church there is definitely like there's this tension of like you should be content in your singleness and also you should be like pressing towards marriage. Like and I definitely don't know how to balance those of like why are you still single and also like be content in your singleness. Like I feel like I get
Right.
that mixed message all of the time and I'm sort of like Aunt Janet, I'm going to really need you to give me some consistency in your wine advice, please, because this is not helpful to me. So, and I think that people, I think what it is that people get married at 22 and that what we're seeing right now with like elevated, like delayed marrying ages. And right now, I looked it up yesterday for an article I'm writing, and there are like 53% of adults between the ages of 18 and 49 are single. So they're as single as in like never married, not even divorced. So we're the majority of adults, that we know are single, and you're just like, this is unprecedented in recent American history, and we just don't know how to deal with it. And I think people are just giving a lot of crappy advice. Are we allowed to cuss on this podcast?
Yes, it's fine.
Let's go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, people are giving a lot of shitty advice because they don't know how to they don't know how to they want to fix it. They think that people not being married is a problem,
Right.
and so they want to fix
Right.
it, and it's actually not a problem.
So it almost comes back
We
to
should be okay.
that cult of romance that Wesley described in an interview with him. Like that's a huge influence of this, where all of a sudden the demographic norms are to be single, but the cultural norms, both within the church and probably outside too, are you can only be fulfilled by having a sexual life.
Yes. And it's so frustrating because we actually like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like we build a church that's only equipped for married people and a culture that like supports that. And yet we as single people, then the majority of single people are still left to like kind of like whittle our way in one by one, trying to fill in the gaps and like find fulfillment there too. And I think that is just a worst case scenario for people, especially when we actually are the majority and can kind of rise up and cry out at this point.
Right.
Down with married people.
Boo.
Right.
Now, is that similar for you as someone who's, because you're 34 now?
Yes. Thanks for telling my age.
Yeah,
Yes.
again, yeah. But as someone who is okay with the kind of hookup culture, like and is, that's we talked about how that's okay, but you still desire marriage, you still desire a family. Are those expectations similar that we've been describing in the church for you, or what's the difference?
I don't know. I think my family is a little bit weird in most cases, in that my parents are not on me to get married. Like that's not. But at the same time, I think that's sometimes subtext along the way, of like definitely extended family members, like not outright saying why aren't you married, but the questions are basically why aren't you married at the same time.
Right.
So I mean, you look at culture, and when I was a kid, like I thought like by this time that would maybe have happened by this point.
Right.
So I don't know. There's a lot of like cultural baggage and my own wants and needs and stuff like that. So definitely, I think I put more pressure on myself than I'm outwardly getting at the same time.
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, because my dad got married at 29, and because that's kind of my expectation of like getting married older rather than younger. Right now, that pressure, when you or someone like Kyle describes that internal pressure of things aren't working out, what am I turning into? That's not the case for me, but will that change when I'm 29? So I'm just curious for you, did that sense of pressure change as you got older and have been going through your 20s?
Daniel, aren't you a baby?
He is literally 13 years old.
Aren't you a child, Daniel?
25, guys. Oh,
He can legally rent a car in the U.S. now. So
it was my life goal to do that. How is it possible that you, who've never met me and is Facebook friends, also calls me a child? Like, it's something that I thought it's just people in person that do that, but no.
I just wanted to make sure that we were on the same page.
Okay.
So the question is, do I feel pressure? I was
And how
distracted
has
by
that
your
pressure
age.
changed? How's that pressure changed over time?
Oh, it's gotten much more. I mean, and for women, it's worse, right? Because we like literally have a biological reminder of
Right.
our age and
Right.
like something that will go away if we do not get married. So I think that And I want a family. Like, I have lots of friends who are actually like, you know what, if I don't ever get to have biological kids, I think I'll actually be okay. And I really want to foster and adopt. That's something that's really important to me. So I actually am kind of in that camp too. I also would love to have biological kids, and I want to have a big family. And so raising children is important to me. So I'm less about biological kids and more about the act of like raising kids. And so I think that starting that process and being with someone to do that is a pressing desire. And so the pressure is building for that. Like that's a reality. And at 22, it doesn't feel like a reality because you have like 40 childbearing years left. You have like many eggs left in you. But every year, like those are slowly dying inside of you. So I think that is really hard to process. And it is something that you grieve, like grieve that I don't have as many years to bear children, and you won't have as many children as you once dreamed that you would, most likely. So I think that the pressure is definitely on. My mom is crazy, and so there's lots of pressure there. So I think that, I think that like maybe worse than that is like the loss of hope that I see in some people. There's like a personal loss of hope sometimes of like, with half a Twizzler hanging out of my mouth, like this is never gonna happen. But I think there's also like a loss of hope from like family members sometimes of like, Joy Beth, like she might not actually get married. And for someone who wants to be married, that is something that's, it's kind of heartbreaking, So I think that, and for someone who wants to have sex, and for someone who like wants all of the like perks of marriage. So I think that for someone like me, I think that's really like disheartening to hear, spoken by people who love you and say mean things about you. That's all.
Yeah. I guess then how does the broader community of the church impact that? Like, is there a welcoming? Is there support there?
Yeah, there should be. I think that the church, when it's like done really well, should fulfill like all of the same needs as marriage, except for the sexual. That's not the church being done well. That's the church being done poorly. But I think with the church, when it's like doing what it's supposed to do, is like, it is relational and it is sanctifying and it's coming together and it's like, bringing you chicken noodle soup when you've got the stomach bug, and it's doing all of that. It's jumping your car in the middle of the night. But I think that right now, like we were saying earlier, the church is actually like kind of built around the nuclear family. I read something that said, when I was writing my book, I wrote a book, you guys. I read something that said...
We'll get there.
I read something that said that the nuclear family is only like the two parents, never divorced, kids, etc. makes up 16% of American families, but it makes up like 80% of the church, which is just like staggering statistic to me.
I believe it.
So anyway, so I think that the church is really modeled to cater to that. And I think that like singles are like trying their best to kind of like weather the storm and like, okay, like I'll approach that family and ask if I can go to lunch with them. And I guess I'll join that Bible study that doesn't really like meet my needs, and be in there with like 6 married couples and listen to their stories about their kids. And I'll go through it. But I don't think that the church is doing a very good job right now. I think we have a lot of room for improvement. But the church at the end of the day, like, is the body, and so like you find your people, and hopefully they're like ministering to you in loving kindness. So I think that like with intentionality and vulnerability in relationships and consistency, like hopefully people are showing up. So
yeah, and I'm curious because there's that disconnect in terms of people that write about how the community of the church should be, and then the actual practices. And even just talking to Wesley earlier today, he was talking about hard practices like moving in with a family in order to foster that sense of community. But I'm wondering, as you've been maneuvering this emotional journey, have there been practices that either you've put in place or that other people in the church have put in place that have made a difference despite the demographics not being how they should.
Yeah. So when I moved to Colorado, I didn't know anybody. I moved to Colorado in 2017 and I didn't know anybody. And that like cold moving like that is actually like really terrifying. And so I was like, you kind of have like a few choices of how you're going to like plunge in because you need people. I know I need people and I didn't have any roommates or anything. So I chose the church as opposed to like, the corner bar or something. And I immediately found like book club and I'm like an amoeba girl. Like I just like barnacle myself to someone and I become a nuisance. And so I think that like a willingness to like make yourself a problem and to feel like a burden. I think that that's something that single people, especially if you've done singleness for a really long time, that you've gotten out of the habit of, like you've gained a lot of independence. And so to have to feel like you are like bothering someone is something that you're not used to.
I was just going to say that the habits of uncomfortableness, the habits of a nuisance, honestly, they fly directly in the face of our culture, which is a very self-centered, narcissistic, and safe, right? Like it's so much more convenient to be quiet and by yourself. Even, I'm not talking about the inconvenience for the family that has to host me. I'm talking about the inconvenience of just being tired after church and not wanting to do it myself.
Yeah. And I think that like a willingness to inconvenience others and to be inconvenienced is, I mean, it's really hard. And and what you were saying earlier, moving in with other people, I've heard of that and with friends of mine and with other families. And it is, and not just to save money, although that's also like a huge part of it, but also just to like have community and to be in community with other people. And it's an awesome thing. I mean, I don't want to do it. But it's something where I just really appreciate the heart of like, there is something that you miss when you live alone that can be really gained from like being in a daily sanctifying space with other people where you're, like dealing with crumbs on the counter and like little kids running around and toilet paper that goes under instead of over.
That's the hardest one.
That's the hardest one.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. This is Kyle breaking into this great conversation. We were so excited to have Joy Beth Smith join us. As always, Assumptions is brought to you by the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. If you haven't gone to the Alberta Podcast Network's website, you should do that right now. There are so many great shows to listen to. Shows like High Level Showdown, The Young Gaffers, Future Chat, Hockey Feels, or a great podcast called That's So Maven. This is a podcast by, for, and about femmes in business and leadership. Tune in for interviews and deep dives hosted by Andrea Bessa. I had the pleasure of hearing Andrea speak at the second annual Pod Summit that I attended last weekend, and I can assure you that you will have a great time hearing the chats that she conducts on her show. Check out all the great shows by going to albertapodcastnetwork.com. Secondly, we are helped by the ATB. Specifically this week, I want to highlight ATB Cares. This is maybe the coolest thing ever. You can donate to your favorite charity, and ATB will add 15% onto that donation. In 2017 alone, over $4 million was donated that way. If you're interested, go to atbcares.com for more information. Lastly, if you have a smartphone, you should download the CKUA app. That's a radio station here in Alberta, but all of the shows that are on the Alberta Podcast Network can be listened to through that app. Assumptions included. Whether you use Android or iOS, you can easily listen to all of the shows on the CKUA app. Thanks everyone for listening. Next episode, I believe we will be back to finish off our season, or it might be another interview, and then we'll get back to finishing the season on the episode after that. It all depends on trying to organize Daniel and I's schedule, so we'll keep you posted. But for now, let's get back to hearing from Joy Beth Smith. It's interesting because for me, being a supreme introvert, what I find is that I love it when I am around very close friends. I get rejuvenated. It's really intellectually stimulating stuff for me. But sometimes I'll find myself like at my home. I don't live with anyone currently at the moment, so it's just me inside this condo. And it's like the thought of going out and doing something sometimes, like I just don't want to. I don't want to drive there, find parking, go out there. Even if I know I'm going to have a good time when I go there, the actual act of moving outside of your own comfort zone is sometimes the hardest first step.
Yeah, I'm an extrovert and I still feel that way. And I still have days where I'm like retreating inside of myself instead of like putting in the effort of like going to the social places and doing the things that I probably should do. And I think that's such a balance for me especially this past year, I battled a lot of depression. And I think that for an extrovert is actually like the worst possible case, because you retreat inside yourself, but you need people to recharge and to pull you out of it so much. And even more so because you're an extrovert and you like crave the energy of people. And so it was actually like really debilitating, because I knew I'm going to start crying. And I knew that I like desperately needed people, and I like was doing everything in my power to like push them away, you know? And I think that the internet was kind of a saving grace at that point, because I still had connection. But I just couldn't like get out of my four walls. But I still had like connection to people through the internet. But I don't know, single people, I feel like my roommates have done a world of good for me in that, because there was like always like one person that I could have a connecting point to, like even if it was just at the end of the day to like download with, and then they went to their room and I went to mine. It was still something. So that was really, I love my roommate. She'll listen to this, so I have to give her a plug.
That's great.
Gotta plug the book and plug the roommate,
Right.
and then we're good.
I mean, talking about the internet itself, I mean, there's good and bad, I guess, with any kind of technology, but certainly over the last few months, the Me Too movement has been something that has been pretty eye-opening, I think, for some people, and pretty revolutionary in a lot of different industries. I guess what do you feel has been the reaction of the church at large, or at least the evangelical side of things?
Oh my gosh.
Gross.
And like, I'm so thankful for Me Too. And I am such a huge fan of the movement and people sharing their stories and vulnerability. I'm a huge advocate for all of that. I think that I feel like little sparks of this have happened in the past, but they haven't gained the traction that it has now. And then actually, so Me Too has spawned Church Too, which is kind of like where Me Too stories that have
It's a sequel, right?
Yeah,
It's like Church
the
2?
sequel,
Okay.
right.
Yeah, okay.
And so it's stories of sexual abuse or sexual assault that have happened within the church. And I think what's so encouraging about Church Too is that it sort of says, like, I mean, because lots of Me Too stories could have just been church stories, but what Church Too says is that like the church is not excluded from sexual misconduct specifically. It's like calling out the church, you know, because it wasn't Hollywood Too, even though Me Too like stories were Hollywood stories, you know, and it wasn't DC Too, even though there were lots of stories about politicians and all of their mess. But it was Church Too. And I think that that's really significant, because there's just a lot of really gross, horrible things that have happened. And I think that happens when you know, it's almost like the Pharisees of like, when you try and so tightly regulate and control things, inevitably it kind of breeds this like petri dish of shame and people who do really awful things and try and cover it up, and it just like festers and takes on disgustingness. So Church Too has happened and is even picking up momentum. There's something right now called Silence is Not Spiritual. And it's a whole petition of leaders who've signed this statement that says, you know, we are encouraging reconciliation.
So there's the toxic culture of sexuality that you've written about in some of your articles, and that the Church Too movement is talking about. Then there's also this very bold stance that a lot of churches are taking on sexual ethics, in terms of how the culture is becoming more and more non-binary, and the church doesn't like that. But I feel like so I'm just curious how you maneuver those two, like of sexual ethics in terms of how should the church handle that, but then how can that be reconciled with hypocrisy within sexual conduct?
Yeah. I think it's a mess.
Yeah.
We need 20 words or less.
Yeah.
I feel like I am not an expert on this. I will lead with that. And I feel like I will say that I speak mostly as a victim of the toxic culture of sexuality in the church. And so most of my experience is in that point of view. And so I think it's really sad when the people who are leading with the most healthy view of sexuality is the culture and not the church. And I think that's one of the things that I write about in my book is that like the conversation of sexuality and the conversation of what's healthy here is actually like the best work that's being done is outside the walls of the church, and that the church is so unhealthy, and we're keeping so much in the dark here. And I think that is just really frustrating, and it's so repressive for so many people. And I think that's why stuff like the chart is so exciting for me, because it's liberating for so many people who feel restricted in the binaries that are given to them. And it's, there are stupid things like the metaphors that youth pastors give that are toxic, and then there are stupid things like the gender binaries, and there are stupid things like the even just like complementarianism that feels like it sounds healthy, and then you like actually start looking at it and you're like, oh, this is actually like really painful to a lot of people when it plays out in these different areas, And so I think that for me, what is really frustrating is that we should be leading and we're actually like pulling against what's healthy, and challenging culture and saying like, oh no, you're wrong. And we're actually like, that's progressive and that's healthy and that's would be really beneficial to a lot of people. And we're losing people to the health, who are seeing that that's healthy and seeing that would make a lot of repairs in their own life. So, yeah, I long for a day that the church is the one who's leading the conversation of what's healthy in sexuality. I think that day is a really long way from now.
Fair enough, yeah. And is it something that the healthiness that you're looking for within the constructs of what we just talked about on our podcast, and then with Wesley again, of the New Testament's idea of how sexuality fits within God's design? Like, how do you balance those two, like the sense of the restrictions that are unhealthy that church culture places versus the balance that the Bible gives that there are still constraints?
Are you asking, like, what are you asking me?
I guess, how do you, when you say that the culture's view of sexuality is in some ways more healthy than the church's, how does what is healthy about the culture, what would you say is healthy about the culture, and what would you say has to change about the church in the context of biblical sexual ethics?
Sure. Well, sure. I don't think that the Bible outlines like, the spectrum of sexuality, for instance. I think that the Bible is like really mute about sexuality. And so I think that there's a lot of room for us to be like, this makes sense. And like binary, like just a straight, like you either have a sex drive or you don't, doesn't make sense. And so I think that in that instance, like I can pop out my purple and red chart and be like, this feels healthier for us to embrace than, like you have a sex drive and you don't, so I'm going to choose to like incorporate this into youth group material, and teach it to kids. And I think that, taking strides to, there's a lot of like manipulation in marriages, and there's a lot of like telling single people that they don't have a sex drive, or like that they should just like repress it until they die or something because they're single. Like there's nothing to tell single people, especially, that what they should do with their sex drive. So we're not supposed to have sex until marriage, but we're single. Like, so what are you telling me to do? The church doesn't tell me anything to do. And this is just an example, obviously one that matters to me. So what is it that we're supposed to do? And the church doesn't give us any kind of rhetoric. It doesn't give us any kind of instruction. But there's lots that we could do. That we could go running. We could, I mean, there's a whole discussion that people are having about masturbation that we're not having, you know, but the church isn't weighing in at all. And like maybe the church could actually have that discussion. Maybe they could equip you with the tools to think it through for yourself. But instead, we're not even providing tools for that discussion, you know. And I think that there's a lot of room for like Christian liberty of like, we're not telling you what to think, but we're at least providing you with ways to like reason it out for yourself. So I think that I know that there are lots of things that the world teaches the world, quote unquote. There are lots of things that Guile teaches that I'm not saying that the church should embrace. But I think that there are lots of things that they are that they have created and that they're leaning towards and that they have generated that are liberating and that they're freeing and that they cause great discussion, like this.
Anything else you wanted to
Well, you've been dropping hints about your book the whole time.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
We want to just like let the cat out of the bag and have you talk about it for a bit. But I think specifically, how do you hope that tell us about your book, but then also how do you hope that the book, what conversations and what changes do you hope that this book will spark within that culture?
We are going to give you the assumptions bump right now.
That's right. Yeah.
But better.
It's like a birthday bump, but different.
Okay, so my book is called Party of One. It launches on February 6th. Out of listen to that accent, Thomas Nelson, and it is basically I've been calling it a conversation. Like the whole thing is just meant to be a conversation. I have absolutely no answers in that book. It is not a book of answers. It is not a memoir. It is nothing. It is me. I met with hundreds of single girls across the country, anywhere from like 18 to 42, and we talked about being single, and we talked about they're single moms, they're divorcees, there were a couple of widows, and lots and lots of single women, and we talked about how hard it is to be single and how hard it is to do all of the things, and we talked about just how wrong the church gets it. And the premise of it is just that there's a lot of longing in singleness, and that there is a lot of grief in singleness. And I don't feel like we're really given space to explore that. I think a lot of people kind of like push under the rug. And so I wanted to give space to like embrace the longing that comes with your singleness, but also to celebrate it. That it's a both and at the end of the day. I also wanted to explore a lot of sexuality in a Christian context, but kind of redefine it that like sexuality is a part of singleness and it's part of like all of your relationships, and what that means as far as like interacting as a single person, and tackle a lot of the tricky topics. And yeah, so it's really fun. It's
What was the most surprising thing that you learned from all those interviews?
Oh my God. Oh, interviews or research? Can we talk about research?
Research. Yeah, let's do research.
Yeah. One of the most surprising things was this really awesome research coming out of University of Texas. And it was doing brain scans on women, and it was talking about how the chemicals that are released in your brain at orgasm are exactly the same as the chemicals released in your brain in deep moments of bonding with your friends. And they're calling it relational orgasms. And this was fascinating.
That is amazing.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Out of context, that could be taken so many different wrong ways, but I love that. That's great.
Tell us more why you think what you're about to say that's fascinating because, and then we were just like, no, it is fascinating.
It is fascinating.
So tell us, it is,
especially because we see a lot of women. Well, I'm not gonna say a lot, but we've seen a trend of women who are leaving their husbands later in life and going towards female partners, and especially their like long-term female friends. And so it was kind of this like, what on earth is happening? Or I actually had tell me that like I never thought that I was gay. I never have even really been attracted to women, but I'd had like lots of late night conversations with this girl. We really hit it off, yada, yada, yada. And so out of nowhere, this research comes out, and I feel like it makes perfect sense because you just have these moments of connection, and boom, bang, you have this like oxytocin connection to this person.
That's so true. I was just gonna say that that connection, you're mentioning something just in the conversations that should be happening about the sexuality that exists in life, right? And one of the things that Kyle and I have been talking about is how we believe that we are sexual beings, even as Christians. That's part of the Christian understanding of what it is to be human. And so to understand that can exist within friendships as well, I think that's really helpful.
Oh my gosh, you guys, that's like the basis of my argument, is that everybody is sexual, and there's like this like kind of like lace of like sexuality that goes through all your relationships.
Yeah, and it's something that Wesley talks about too, in the sense of how can friendships, deep friendships, committed friendships within the confines of the church fulfill that sense of loneliness that we all face in life, no matter if we are sexually active or not.
Yeah.
So fascinating.
And I think part of that sense of being human that you talked about, that's something we've been talking a lot about on Assumptions, and is a good way just to kind of end this conversation, in the sense that as humans, we are beings that are created with a body, or exist with a body, depending if you believe in a creator or not.
That's right. That's right.
But that sense that there is something more going on, that we have to have these conversations, and we have to be aware of this. We can't just hide it. We have to talk about it, is something we believe in. And so we're really excited that you're talking about this and are excited about this. And I look forward to reading the book.
Yay! Thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks for being
I'm
here.
going to tell this to Daniel right now. It would be fun if we could somehow arrange it. When the book comes out, we should do like a live stream from here after we've read it, and just like talk about it.
That'd be great.
Between you and
That'd
be fun.
That'd be really fun.
Joy Beth, if people were super interested and wanted to stay up on what you're doing, how can they do that on the internet?
At JB's 2 cents. So at JBS TWOCENTS. I've never had to spell it out.
SCENT.
That's tricky.
That
at JB's 2 cents is all my stuff. So you can find me
on Twitter,
on Insta, on Facebook. Yeah.
Also, if you just Google her name, I did a bunch of this as preparing.
I'm really famous, so you can just Google me.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks for having us, and we look forward to continuing the conversation.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Right. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Assumptions is produced by Kyle Marshall and Daniel Melville Jones. This episode was edited by me, Kyle Marshall. Our thumbnail was created by the always great Chris Taniguchi. Most of the music in this episode is from the band The Parson Redheads. You can check out their music anywhere digital music is available. If you want a full rundown of the articles and media that we referenced, check out the show notes that Daniel puts together that are attached to this episode. It's always a great document he puts together. Thanks for listening to The Credits. We will be back in a couple of weeks.